A wise man proportions his belief to the evidence. David Hume, Scottish philosopher and historian. All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. Tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. And let me ask you a favor of you folks. If you enjoy the show, be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons to my channel. And for the really serious folks out there, hit that bell so you never miss an episode. All right. So today, before we get into talking about Popeye, let me give you a very quick update. There is a pretty massive hurricane heading toward Florida. It is on the west coast of Florida, so on the Gulf side. And I am actually in Jacksonville, so I am on the east side. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm out of danger, but my anticipation at this time, because of where I live in Jacksonville, that my experience is going to be relatively similar to that when Helene came through. Now, that could obviously change. Things could happen, in the next day or so, and the storm could hit harder than I expect. I am not a weather forecaster. I'm just kind of making an assumption based on the information that I have seen. So, will there be a show the next few days? That's going to really largely depend on whether or not I have power. If I have power and I don't have any problems here, then the show will go on. So if there is no show, then presume that either I lost power or a tree fell down and I've got to figure something out. So, but I expect that I will be just fine. Speaking of hurricanes, weather control conspiracy. Can the government control weather? Well, much of the conversation that I've found tends to rely on Operation Popeye, which was an operation held in Vietnam. And so let's take a look at some of the things that people say online regarding Operation Popeye. So let's see here. Let me get everything set up just a little bit more here. There we go. All right. So there. All right. So we've got Operation Popeye also. Oh, it's moving on me. Why is it moving? It's not supposed to be moving. Give me a second here. Why? Let's see here. Let's try. Not supposed to be moving. All right. Not supposed to be moving without my control. All right. So, all right. Let's see what we got here. Well, well, that's a bummer. I had it all set up and it seems like I'm having a little bit of trouble controlling the comments, but I'll do my best. In my opinion, it's because they don't want the correlation between North Carolina and Operation Popeye, Vietnam, let alone the government is actively trying to kill us. Facts. And this is in response to Jack Poso saying, Pete Buttigieg announces private drones are restricted from flying over hurricane areas. This prevents civilian volunteers from locating victims in need or showing footage of the disaster. See, can I control this? Where's my control? There we go. Oh, there it is. Okay. So there we are. All right. Cloud seeding in Dubai is not a new practice. Operation Popeye was a chemical weather modification program carried out by the U.S. during the Vietnam War 1967 to 1972. The highly classified project was sponsored by Henry Kissinger and the CIA without authorization of then Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird. The goal was to increase rainfall in carefully selected areas to deny the Vietnamese enemy, namely military supply trucks, the use of roads by softening road surfaces and causing landslides along roadways. If the government openly used weather as a weapon against foreign country, why wouldn't they do the same to you? Interesting question. We'll be talking about these questions in just a moment. I'm so sick of being called a conspiracy theorist over this. They don't deny doing it. Any government that can manipulate weather have zero authority preaching has I'm gonna insert that for you, has zero authority preaching climate change. Anyone can look up Operation Popeye. Operation Popeye, also known as Popeye Motor Pool Intermediary Compatriot, it did have several names, by the way, was a top secret campaign, highly classified weather modification geoengineering program in Southeast Asia during 1967 to 1972, conducted by the United States Air Force, aka chemtrails. The U.S. military has been controlling the weather since the Vietnam War. This was reported as early as 1972 by Seymour Hersh. Operation Popeye, as it was called, increased precipitation over the Ho Chi Minh Trail by something like 30%. That was over 50 years ago. Just imagine the technology today, not to mention how much more evil our leaders have become, kowtowing to foreign interests that hate American interests, our citizens. So don't be a moron. Of course, they are weaponizing the weather. It's even been on the World Economic Forum and Bilderberg's agenda for decades. I don't know why people are still denying weather modification when we have hundreds of patents. Operation Popeye, Operation Cyrus, cloud seeding, etc. We have clips of scientists saying we can control the weather. They have had the technology since the 1940s. Imagine how advanced it is now. Got a couple more here, folks. Go on Wikipedia. It's right there for you to read. It's called cloud seeding. Seeding, not seating. It's been done for decades. It was done during the Vietnam War, Operation Popeye, to prolong the monsoon. Operation Popeye never happened. It was not a cloud seeding project done by the military to soften road surfaces and cause mudslides in Vietnam. This is totally fake. And then the user here posts a link or a screenshot of the Wikipedia article on Operation Popeye. Cloud seeding is legit. Read about Operation Popeye during the Vietnam War. And the last one, why are so many people acting like weather modification isn't real? They used it in Vietnam War. Look up Operation Popeye. But that's one small example. Look at the CIA reading room. Search weather modification or weather manipulation. It seriously takes a Google search, which, by the way, I did. We have to stop allowing people to lie by laughing at the absurdity of their BS. So we will see if I laugh at people's BS today or not, or if I confirm it. Who knows what's going to happen? All right, so there's a little bit of what you can see out there on Twitter. So there's a lot of people that are like, "Hey, Operation Popeye, it totally happened." Now, here's the thing: Operation Popeye, it was indeed real. The real important question is not whether it actually happened. That's pretty well established. I mean, it was a lot of documentation for that. The real important question is to what extent? That's the question that people aren't really asking, much less answering. So let me show you a video here real quick. This is just an introduction to a documentary, just to kind of give you a small insight into Operation Popeye and what it was about. So let's see. Here we go.
As the Vietnam War reached a crossroads, the U.S. Army had important decisions to make if they wanted to tip the scale back to their side. All options were on the table, both conventional and unconventional. And among the most unusual plots was Operation Popeye, launched in an attempt to weaken the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the Viet Cong's most vital mechanism and supply flow tool. To accomplish this, the U.S. would turn the weather into a weapon of war. Operation Popeye utilized cloud seeding technology, a type of weather modification that artificially creates rain or snow. With it, the U.S. military extended at least 5 monsoon seasons, causing detrimental effects to the unknowing Vietnamese citizens and soldiers. The mission spanned 5 years and cost taxpayers over $15 million. Despite multiple hearings in Congress, military officers, and even President Nixon himself denied it existing at all.
All right. So that's just a little clip from a small documentary. You can find it all over social media, and there's actually various little, like, you might call them mini documentaries, like 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes. And you can, watch, and that's basically the information that they give. Some of them will go into more in depth, like how does this cloud seeding work? I've got another video that we can watch here in just a moment. We're going to go to intermission real quick, play a little video, intermission video. After that, Remember, I said I did a Google search. Well, I love going to the primary sources as best as I can. So that's what we're going to do. And we're going to find out kind of what happened and what we can learn from some of this information. So we'll be right back after we go to this intermission.
A record number of Americans favor a new political party.
57% of Americans still believe a third major political party is necessary.
Voting third party is a wasted vote? Bullshit. This is the establishment's most successful lie in modern politics. America is the only major country with free elections to only have two viable options. Not anymore. The Libertarian Party is the fastest growing political party in America and will be on the ballot in all 50 states. And when we talk about winning, we don't just mean winning the White House. There's all kinds of wins you can have in your state if you vote Libertarian today. We can win ballot access that makes it easier for future candidates to run for office. We can win major party status that gives us more attention from major media.
I think it's a great day to be a libertarian.
And we can have libertarians getting elected all over the country in local races. Whenever libertarian candidates are able to break through the mainstream media blackout, our support grows. In my televised debate with Senator Raphael Warnock, I was able to reach out to millions of voters. Many of them realized that they were libertarian all along and just didn't know it. Why is that the radical idea, not the rational idea? If you live in a solid blue or a solid red state, voting for Trump or Biden is a wasted vote, and it won't change the outcome. Voting libertarian is the only way to make your vote truly count. Currently, all the two major parties have to do is be slightly less evil than the other side to win. Let's make the statement that we will accept no evil. When someone tells you you're wasting your vote, recognize that they don't care about you. It's a selfish statement. They are saying that your beliefs are worth being represented, that you should silence your voice so theirs can be louder. Vote your conscience, not someone else's politics. Breaking up the duopoly is the only chance for the real radical change needed to give the power back to you, the people. Voting for Chase Oliver for president will contribute to bringing more choices into our political system. A successful third party forces the two old parties to think about the issues Americans truly care about. Keep them honest. Show them they must earn your vote. Change begins at the grassroots. I'm Chase Oliver, a candidate for president, and I approve this message.
All right, we are back, and just want to put a comment up here on the screen and read this out. Mr. Geller says, doing the Lord's work today. I do that every day. Social media has become a willing accelerant of these pernicious conspiracy theories. Indeed. No, the government cannot control weather, and patents filed are not evidence of current technology being used. I feel like somebody's trying to steal my thunder, but no worry. I have more thunder yet left to give. So let's talk about, let's get into this. So first and foremost, a lot of these conspiracy theories, they operate on framing the answer in the form of a question. So in this particular case, they'll say, well, government did this. Don't you think they could also do this? Government once did it here in Vietnam. Don't you think they could have done Helene? And so the question is kind of framed as if it's the answer. Or another form might be more like, well, if government had this limited capability back then, what do you think they have now? Right. And again, this is a question that is framing where the answer is framed in the form of a question. So, but that's not going to work for me. I like actual answers, and I can ask lots of questions too. And I have with various conspiracy theories, and people don't have answers to those. And I'm like, so whose conspiracy is right? Your conspiracy or my conspiracy that your conspiracy is no good? So what we'll do is we're going to play this video from CBS. So this has American physicist, see if I get his name right, Michio Kaku on here. And this is from 2013, and he's talking a little bit about cloud seeding. And I thought this was just a relevant and useful clip. And then what we're going to do for the source, the actual source information, I dug up the transcript for Senate hearing for the 93rd Congress, right? This is back in 1974. And this whole hearing was all about weather manipulation. So we're going to read what was said during the 93rd Congress in 1974, specifically related to Operation Popeye. And we will get an idea of what capability they actually had then. And I think we'll learn some stuff. So let's play this video clip, and then we'll move right along here. So let's see. Boom, boom. there.
You know, they were talking about climate change yesterday, and now we're learning that scientists and researchers are looking at how to change the weather on purpose. That's right. Lasers now could one day manipulate rain and lightning. CBS This Morning contributor.
I have to ask, are these the Jewish lasers, space lasers? I don't even know.
Michio Kaku is a physics professor at City College of New York. Professor, nice to see you. Extraordinary seeing Al Gore and Bill Clinton there together with Charlie, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. They did not get into this discussion,
No.
though. But it is fascinating. I mean, lasers, really? To change the weather?
That's right. Well, as Mark Twain once famously said, everyone complains about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it. Well, instead of doing a rain dance, we physicists are firing trillion-watt lasers into the sky to actually precipitate rain clouds and actually bring down lightning bolts. This is potentially a game changer.
But this is
Okay, so let's pause here for just a second. So if you picked up on it already, he said precipitate rain clouds. Okay, that's going to be important because they're not just creating rain clouds out of nowhere. They're making them precipitate. They have, and we're going to find out more about how this works and kind of how it doesn't work.
experimental.
It's experimental. However, in the laboratory so far, it works. When you have water vapor and you have dust particles or ice crystals, you can precipitate rain. It condenses around the seeds. These seeds can also be created by laser beams. By firing trillion-watt lasers, you rip apart the electrons, creating what are called ions. And these ions act like seeds, like dust particles, bringing down rain and even lightning.
So this is a new technology compared to what happened in Operation Popeye. In Operation Popeye, the scientist who discovered that they could do anything at all was working in his laboratory, and he had like this ice box. I think he called it an ice box, basically like a freezer. And he was using that to create certain weather conditions. And he came in one morning and he found out that I think the ice box had been turned off by accident. And so he turned it back on and he was trying to rapidly cool it up again so that he could continue his work. And so he put in some dry ice. And so he started noticing that, hey, if I put this dry ice in, certain things are happening. And that led to this discovery that they could seed clouds and then the Operation Popeye itself. So what he's talking about, what Mr. Kaku is talking about here is a bit different and it's a bit newer. So it kind of goes into that question of like, well, what could they do? If they could do this in the 1960s, what could they do in 2024, right? And that's this question. It's framed as if it were an answer. Well, we're getting a little bit of an answer now. We know that, hey, we used to have to do it one way. Now we have more than one way. At least we can use lasers, if not some other techniques. All right, let's continue.
Go ahead.
Well, this fascinates me in part because, too, I remember reading the stories that China had used this during the Olympics, that the USSR had used this after Chernobyl to create rain clouds. I mean, did those really work then? We have some of these capabilities now?
Inconclusive. Even in the 60s, the CIA used this to bring down monsoons during the Vietnam War to wash out the Viet Cong. Governments have been playing with this thing.
Alleged to.
Alleged to, right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to find out that it wasn't alleged. I don't know why they're saying it's alleged. We literally have documentation. And then I don't think I've ever corrected a physicist before, but I'm going to do it right now. He said to bring down monsoons. It's actually not true. What they were doing, and again, I'll show you my source and the information. What they were doing was they were extending the monsoon season. They were trying to increase in the weather that already was in existence. So they weren't, and I think it was just a slip of the tongue on his part. I imagine if he were here, he would say, yeah, you're right. So I don't think it's a huge correction, but I'm going to take it when I can because, I'm not a physicist. Anyway.
Now, we realize that for decades now, these governments have been alleged to have experimented with weather control, but nothing conclusive. This time we're bringing in the laws of physics rather than simply waving our hands and uttering mumbo jumbo. We're actually using trillion-watt lasers now. And in the laboratory, sure enough, they precipitate rain out of water vapor. Sure enough, you can actually bring down.
Okay, so there you hear it. They precipitate rain out of water vapor. This is important because if you don't have water in the sky, if you don't have some sort of cloud or something, there's no rain to get. Okay, that's pretty important.
Electricity down the beam.
So what does it mean for drought areas that need to have rain for crops? And if they don't have them, there's the consequences of famine.
Well, the bad news is if it's a clear blue sky, it's not going to do anything at all because it only takes water vapor that's already in the air and condenses it. However, for floods, for agriculture, farmers, for people planning wedding parties, football games, you name it, outdoor events and agriculture and flooding and even hurricanes, all of them could be subject to weather modification.
Incredibly interesting, Professor Michio Kaku. Thank you so much.
All right. So subject to weather modification. So we need to understand that there's a difference between, say, controlling the weather and, say, modifying the existing weather. And I'm making this distinction on the basis of, let's assume that controlling the weather means like full control. And then we say, okay, but modification means, hey, there's a limited amount of control. And he acknowledges it. We have evidence of it. This is not the conspiracy in itself is not really whether or not we can modify or kind of give weather a little bit of a bump. That's not really a conspiracy. That's actually fact. The real question is, can we create weather on any significant level? Like, could we create a disastrous hurricane that's coming right up before an election? And I'm not even sure what that would assume to accomplish, right? Well, the answer, I'm going to argue, is no, according to the evidence. Now, maybe there's evidence we don't have. Once upon a time, people said, hey, I think they're doing something over in Vietnam with the weather. And, everybody was like, nope, no, we're not. We're not doing anything. Not happening at all. And then it turned out we were, right? So it's always possible that there's some level of knowledge that's being hidden from the public. And maybe 20 years from now, we'll find out like, wow, they really can create a hurricane. It's possible. But again, we're going to operate on what we can prove, not the questions that we can ask. So let's pull up this document here. And this is this comes from, let's see, go to the very beginning here on my document. So this comes from the hearing before the Subcommittee on Oceans and International Environment on the Committee of Foreign Relations, United States Senate. So let me pull that up on the screen so that everybody can see that here. And then I'll be sure to read everything here that we need to know about for those who are just listening in on the side. So here this document is. If you want to read it in full, it is about 128 pages. I encourage you, if you really want to know what the government said during their hearing after the fact, you'll learn a lot. You really will. So this is page 1. This tells you what it is, 1974, September 23rd. So we're going to skip on over to page 93, and we're going to look. One of the things that people tell me is they're like, well, it was a success. And whenever success is such an interesting word because people say, well, what's the measure of success? And so what I want to do is I want to look and say, okay, what did the military say was their objective here? What were they trying to achieve? Because a lot of people are like, well, like one of the things that I heard was, well, they made it rain and extended the monsoon season from like 30 to 45 days. In fact, somebody pointed me to, where is that image that I've got? Let's see, I've got an image here. This Science Direct. Let's see here. Let's see if I can pull it and make it a little bit bigger. There we go. All right. So I'll put this up on the screen there. So this came from a link. And again, the link's in the show notes. And what does it say here? You can see that the relevant portion is highlighted in purple, but it says an amazing way. This is an excerpt. So it's just a citation from a larger document called The Impact of Warfare on the Soil Environment from 2013, Earth Science Reviews. I did not have access to read the whole thing, so I can only look at this clip here. It says, amazing way to induce large-scale mudding is weather modification. Famous in this regard is Operation Popeye, a program designed by the U.S. Army to intensify the monsoon by seeding the clouds with silver iodide for the purposes of extending the rainy summer monsoon season to muddy up the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia that served as a conduit for Viet Cong supplies and personnel. I want you to notice it says to intensify the monsoon and then extending the rainy summer monsoon season, right? So they're not talking about creating weather that wasn't present already. Then the highlighted portion here, Operation Popeye continued from September 1967 until July 1972 and was relatively successful, extending the monsoon period from the average of 30 to 45 days and really slowing down the truck traffic. So, really slowing down the truck traffic, that's now there may be more clarity in the actual document, but that line right there, that's not what I consider to be evidence. Really slow. Like, I don't know what that means. Like slowing it down, what? Like they can only bring 2 trucks instead of 5? Like I don't know. Like again, when we talk about success, we need very clear objectives. You know, if I say I want this podcast by the end of 2024 to have 10,000 subscribers, that's a very, very clear objective. And then we can look and say at the end of 2024, which by the way, it's not my objective, but if it were, we could look and we can say, did you achieve that or did you not? A good success, a good measure of success, a good objective can be answered with either yes or no. Either you accomplished it or you did not. That's how metrics work. So when people say things like, well, they extended it from an average of 30 to 45 days, the question I have is, was that their goal in the first place? Was that the actual goal? Or was that just something that they could measure after the fact? So let's go back to this document here and we're going to look at it and we're going to see what was their what was their objective. So objective of the program. The program was to increase rainfall sufficiently in carefully selected target areas to further soften the road surfaces, cause landslides along roadways, and to wash out river crossings. These events normally and naturally occur anyway during the height of the rainy season. By seeding, it was intended to extend the period of occurrence beyond the normal rainy season and to supplement the natural rainfall as required to maintain the resultant poor traffic conditions. So effectively, what in part, yes, it was to extend the season. But more than just extend the season, it was to ensure that they maintained the poor traffic conditions, because just extending it and if the enemy was able to continue moving supplies even during an extended monsoon, then their objective was not met. So simply saying, oh, they extended the rainy season is not enough. They had to extend it in order for it to cause a certain result, the slowdown of supplies from the enemy. And then they list out the objective here: increase rainfall sufficiently in carefully selected areas to deny the enemy the use of roads by, number 1, softening road surfaces, number 2, causing landslides along roadways, number 3, washing out river crossings, number 4, maintain saturated soil conditions beyond the normal time span. So maintaining saturation, which you can kind of fall under extending the monsoon season, yes, that would kind of be it, but it's not the full story because just extending it is insufficient. What I'm going to do as we're going through this, because it's a Senate hearing and people are asking questions and different people get to talk, like they kind of go back and forth on information. So there's not really like this really simple chronological, like I can talk about this information, then I can talk about this information, then I can talk about this information, because as they're answering and asking questions, asking and answering questions, they sometimes bring up things from, a few moments ago and whatnot. So I'm just going to go through this in the order in which it's printed. So we're going to kind of double back and go back and forth on some of this information. So bear with me as we do that, but I think it's all going to make sense nonetheless. All right. So let's move on to page 96. And when I say 96, you might notice that the numbers don't match up. This is 96 of the PDF, not necessarily 96 of the actual document itself. All right. So we go to 96 here and we see requirements for and effects of favorable seeding. So now now we want to talk about what are the conditions to make seeding even favorable, right? Overseeding or improperly placing seeding tends to disperse the clouds. So you have clouds, they're already there. You're not creating clouds, you're not moving clouds necessarily, they're already present. And if you overseed or you do it incorrectly, they could just go away. There is no chance of prolonged effects. Under nearly perfect conditions, effects last possibly 6 hours maximum. Normally, the effect is about 1/2 hour. Further, a favorable seeding requires low velocity and unidirectional winds to prevent dispersal. The effects are therefore limited in area, perhaps 20-mile diameter under ideal conditions, and continuous seeding where groups of clouds could be knitted together to form one large storm center. With this program, with this background in technique in mind, let me now turn specifically to our program. So this kind of gives you an idea of what they have to have. Certain conditions. Certain conditions have to be present. And if they're not present, well, then it's simply not going to work. Moving on to the next page, it is the consensus of the scientific community that the techniques employed could not be used to create large, uncontrolled storm systems, accidentally or purposely. That's a very valuable line because a lot of people were saying, like, oh, Helene, they did this on purpose. Okay, well, how do you know this? You cannot say they did this on purpose because once upon a time they were able to affect the weather during during the Vietnam War. That because we need one to have a motive. The reason why somebody could even find out that there was a motive because we had a military over in Vietnam. When somehow, Seymour Hersh or whoever broke the story, they had to get some information and they also had to have a motive. What would the motive be? Well, over there, it's pretty simple. The motive is to win the war, right? That's what they want to accomplish. But here we see that the consensus of the scientific community, not the consensus of the military, which we could put into doubt, right? Like, I mean, if they're already lying to you and telling you that it's not happened, then later telling you, hey, the consensus among all of our scientists, I mean, they could just be telling you whatever they want to tell you, just like they have before, just like they did after in many, many situations. Conversely, seeding to the extent conducted in Southeast Asia did not cause drought in now neighboring areas. There is simply too much moisture in the air in that part of the world, and operations affected only a small percent of it, probably less than 5%. The desired effect was simply to control where that small percentage fell to the ground. So again, they're telling you, hey, we were only able to affect the weather conditions by maybe less than 5%. Less than 5%. And all we were trying to do is just make it hit the ground in certain areas. That's it. Because they had existing clouds that they were trying to impact, that they were trying to modify. All right. So let's keep going on here. Let's see. We're going to go over to page 107. And again, some of this stuff doubles back and goes around. Results of the project. The results of the project cannot be precisely quantified. This is due to the lack of sufficient ground stations to report. In other words, maybe it was a resounding success, maybe it was not. They're not really sure. However, I will point out we did lose the war, so it clearly wasn't that successful. However, the Defense Intelligence Agency, using empirical and theoretical techniques based on units expended and the physical properties of the air mass seeded, estimated that rainfall was increased in limited areas up to 30% above that predicted for the existing conditions. I want to cast a little bit of doubt here. Above that predicted for the existing conditions. How often have we seen yet today predictions that end up not coming true? I don't know about you, but here in Jacksonville, it happens all the time. I look up on the weather and I'm like, oh, look, it says 90% chance of rain and then sunny skies, right? And vice versa. Sometimes it'll be like, hey, it looks like it's just going to be cloudy today. And then bam, we get a nice heavy rain for about an hour. right? So things change, and the predictions are not really all that good. So their prediction at the time was, their estimation was like, hey, this was 30% above our predictions. Well, were your predictions good in the first place? Because if the predictions were bad, let's say prediction was under, well, then that 30% becomes smaller, right? So now the impact that you've had is less. Sensor recordings and other information following seeding indicated enemy difficulties from heavy rainfall. So it 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 basically suggested like, hey, there were some difficulties, but exactly what were those difficulties? Like, how do we quantify them? Well, they already said you cannot precisely quantify this. But again, this doesn't mean that it wasn't successful. That just means there's some doubt because they're not clear exactly. You know, would they have been able to necessarily bring one truck or 10 trucks, right, without the seating? I'm just using trucks as an example, right? Because they're heavy and they might get stuck in the mud. And so maybe under normal conditions, they would be able to bring 10 trucks in a row without any of them getting stuck. And maybe it's possible that with the seeding and the additional rainfall, that instead of 10, they were able to bring only 5 or 1 or whatever, right? But this is the kind of information that we have to have in order to identify whether or not something is truly successful. All right, let's see what else we got here. These storms, although bringing heavy natural rainfall, also caused poor seeding conditions by covering the area with a thick layer of high clouds, which limit the effects of surface heating required for good convective activity. I provide this to point out that there was not a consistent presence of favorable conditions for seeding even in the middle of the rainy season. In other words, what they're saying is they were able to seed the clouds and they were able to have some impact, but their seeding had an impact on future seeding. So maybe the first effort initially, let's just take in one particular year when they said, all right, let's go do this. The conditions are ripe for us to seed. And then they seed, and then they have a rainfall that could impact the second time around and whether or not the second time around was successful or how successful it really was. This information is important. And I'm willing to bet that all those people that are just asking questions aren't giving us these kind of answers. Let's move on. Page 112 here. So we go down to page 112. Again, some more results of the program. While this program had an effect on the primitive road conditions in these areas, the results were certainly limited and unverifiable. It was conducted because of its apparent contribution to the interdiction mission and the relatively low program cost. My libertarian peers probably will love this. The cost was low, so therefore, why not? Let's give it a shot. It's not going to cost us a whole lot of money. But if the cost is high and you cannot guarantee, you cannot verify the conditions, well, or the results, then you have to make some more choices and say, do we really want to spend this money? Now, I know in the video, I think they said something like $15 million or something like that, which is a huge amount of money to us. So the government, they don't really care. Government spends $15 million all the time. Okay. And if they think it's going to help them win a war, then the $15 million may be a very, drop in the bucket. So, and I didn't look up any cost related to the Vietnam War, but that's basically how it's going to work, right? It's my economic friends should love that. They should love that line. An operation such as this is almost unique to this area of the world. Rainfall can be significantly induced only where and when there are natural occurrences of heavy rains. Okay. Furthermore, induced rain can have a significant interdiction effect only where the lines of communication are relatively primitive. So there's two points here to make. Number one, they can't do this unless there is already natural rain, right? They need natural occurrences of heavy rain in order to extend it. And with the hope of extending it, it only is going to work. It's only going to have any value where they can reduce the lines of communication because of their primitive. In other words, they don't have paved roads. So there's a very limited window here of success. So when people tell you, well, Operation Popeye was a success, you can cast doubt on it and you can say, was it? Was it? What's that meme, with Thor? And he's like, was it really? Something like that, right? You can do that, you know, because their own from this congressional hearing, they're casting doubt, and they're not just saying, "Oh yeah, it totally wouldn't work." Totally, like they're giving you reasons why, and these reasons match up with what we know and understand about how seating works in the first place. So this is all aligned. We're not just listening to people just lie through their teeth in Congress, though they might have. I'm sure somewhere in this 128-page document that somebody somewhere was not so truthful. I'm pretty confident of that. Why? Because there's probably more information that they didn't want public. So they probably lied or bent the truth just a little bit. But again, when we look at this and we say, okay, how does seating work in the first place? And is what they're saying matching up with how seating works? The answer here is yes, it does. All right, let's see what else we got. Nope, not this one. So we're going to go to the next page, 118 here. So this is interesting. Those who knew about programs. And then a list of all those who knew, and I'm kind of cutting into a conversation here, and then a list of all those who knew about the programs if you can. And then Mr. Doolin, I'm not sure who he is, he said there were over 1,400 people at one time that did have this clearance, including the men who flew the missions. I think it would be very difficult to compile. Senator Case then says, if not by name, give us a list by category, if you will, so we can see who had knowledge. Mr. Doolin responds that he would do that. Why is this important? Well, when you have these kind of operations, you have to consider like who could possibly know about it and are they in a position to leak that information? Now, somebody somewhere leaked some information because reporters had found out about it and started asking questions. And that's how people like the president and others were able to say, nope, nope, totally not happening. Right. But somebody somewhere knew about it. But the real question isn't, like how many necessarily, but it kind of is. In that particular case, you have operations that are in a foreign country on the other side of the planet. Today, if we're going to talk about like say Hurricane Helene and whether or not there was some operation going on, it becomes a lot harder to hide that information than it was in the 1970s, 1960s, and 1970s. So, for instance, I want you to think about something. There was there was a guy named Jack Sweeney. He was a college student, and he used to have a Twitter account solely dedicated to tracking Elon Musk's private jet. Like he could track somebody's private jet. He's a college kid. Like he wasn't like he's probably a smart guy, but he was a college kid. He wasn't somebody like that worked for the Department of Defense necessarily, or somebody that had, super high level access to information that most people don't. He was a college guy that just had access to flight patterns. And I think when we start talking about like, is the government doing a thing? We have to start considering like, how easy would it be for them to accomplish this? How many people might need to know about it, and how and how easy would this information be able to come out? So far as I've seen, nobody is coming out and saying, "Hey, this guy over here said that the government, and is providing evidence that the government, produced a huge storm in the U.S." So far as I know, what everybody's doing is they're saying, "Well, Operation Popeye happened, so therefore it's possible that it's happening now." And they probably are because the government wants to kill us all. Okay. Well, that's not evidence. That's just a question or that's just speculation. And again, it becomes harder when you're doing it in the US with all the information that's available today, whereas that information was not as available back in the 1960s and 1970s. So 1,400 people seems like a lot, and maybe it is, but it was a lot easier to keep it on the hush hush in those days. 1,400 people today would be much more difficult. So you would have to have fewer people that know about it. And you would have to be able to skirt around all the technology that could spot things. And I saw people online that were like, hey, look at this plane. This plane's doing some weird maneuvers. Why is it looking like this? Right? But again, that's just a question. Questions are not answers. And so you would have to ask yourself and say, well, if the regular person could identify a plane that appears to be flying in an odd pattern, don't you think the government would know about it too and say, maybe we should do something about that? maybe we should keep that a bit on the hush hush. Maybe we should find a way so that some college kid or some Twitter user doesn't easily blow our cover. So, I think this was, I just felt like this was kind of important to kind of highlight that when we're talking about it, because we have, in as much as we have to ask questions, we have to ask questions about our speculation, and we have to be just as subject to them. We want the government to be subject and be like, hey, tell me about this. Okay, well, if you can't answer that, then what am I supposed to think? The same applies when we're talking to conspiracy theorists. If I ask a bunch of questions to a conspiracy theorist and they can't answer them, the same applies. Okay, well, maybe I shouldn't believe you. Just like if I ask the government a bunch of questions and they can't or won't answer them, then maybe I don't believe them either. Right? It's the same. It's the same concept and it's applicable. All right. I think we got one more page here and then I think we'll call this a day. All right, so we'll go to page 122 here. Heavy flooding in North Vietnam. Senator Pell says, was there any relationship between the rainmaking that went on in Southeast Asia and the extraordinarily high floods that occurred at that time in North Vietnam? Mr. Doolin says, there were not, sir. At the time of the heavy flooding in North Vietnam, there were no rainmaking operations conducted. Now, he could be lying, but again, we have to evaluate and say, are other elements of what they're saying, does that match up with what we know? And he says, as Lieutenant Colonel Swayster said in his briefing, in the cases where adequate rainfall did occur, then the seeding would have been superfluous and possibly counterproductive. Seeding could have destroyed the clouds. So you can't just say like, oh, well, they're able to just make this huge disastrous thing happen, at least not from the evidence that we have, because they're telling you that if you're not careful with the seeding, you could ruin the whole project. You could dissipate the clouds. You could potentially make it worse. But again, as we saw earlier, how long will those effects last? And what does it mean to be worse? Would it just be a few extra inches? And I didn't highlight it, but there is a portion in here where one of the people testifying points out and suggests that they got an additional extra 1 or 2 inches of rain at a particular time. And he says, he goes, I don't know if I would even recognize the difference between, I think he says like 12 inches and 14 inches on the ground, right? Like, in other words, is that even sufficient enough for people moving about to even notice? Or, in other words, was the impact of those additional inches sufficient? Now, it might be, it just depends because again, we go back to the objectives. What were their objectives that they were trying to accomplish? Well, they were trying to accomplish conditions that uh, that gave them a military advantage. They weren't just trying to cause a little extra rain. And all throughout the testimony here, we see that a little extra rain may not actually be all that big of a deal. And we see that the seeding has its limitations. It has its limitations on what it can do, on the conditions under which it can do it, and the potential for a complete absolute failure. So, from my perspective, going back and looking at all of this information, the actual source documents, the best that we can get, the best source documents that I can find, I'm going to say that there's no reason to perpetuate this idea that the government is controlling weather on any significant level. It's just simply that, yeah, they can cause it to rain a little bit extra. Are they causing a hurricane to be worse, to be less? Well, it doesn't seem like they're doing it to be less. That seems to be pretty obvious. Are they doing it to make it worse? I don't think so. I don't think the evidence is there. And if the conspiracy theorists want to challenge it, they better come to the table with more information. All right. As Keith Garrett here says, big assertions require big proofs. Indeed, they absolutely do. Let's see. Let's see what else we got in the comments here. And then we're going to wrap up the show for the day. Let's see here. Let's see. That Liberty Lady says, my theory is that spraying of the skies is making the climate worse, and they know it, so they can continue the money train in the name of climate change. Now, that's possible. It's possible because, again, Here's what we know. We can seed clouds, and we can take something that already exists and we can make it a little bit more. And if you can make it a little bit more, then you might be able to say, well, hey, guess what? Climate is changing for the worse. And then you can use that to kind of say, well, maybe we need to do something about it. Maybe what we've been saying all along is true. And it's possible that it's not. But I think that's a fair jump to say maybe government is modifying it enough so that they could say, you need us to implement more programs to do something about this. That's always possible. Do we have evidence? Well, not yet. Will we in 10 or 20 years or 30 or 40? Maybe. Time will tell. All right, folks. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the episode, found it informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you're also subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com or rumble.libertydad.com. While you're there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. Last but not least, remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.